welcome. You're watching Head to Head with UATV. I am Oles Gerjuk. Recently, the world has united their efforts to counteract Russian hybrid warfare. From the latest news, the United Kingdom is setting up a special fake news unit which will be aimed at fighting Russian propaganda. Meanwhile, the United States recently announced that Russian TV outlet RT America must register as a foreign agent after it meddled in the 2016 U.S. presidential race. What about EU's policy on this issue? To answer this question, we are joined in the studio by Gosha Tykhyi. He is a freelance producer currently working with the German TV channel ARD. Hello, and thank you for being with us today.
Hi, thank you.
Mr. Tykhyi, how does the European Union recognize and counteract Russian propaganda?
Well, we see lots of efforts lately. We see EU vs Disinfo effort, for example, like many think tanks are being created, which are following the Russian propaganda and which are countering it. I wouldn't say that this effort is enough yet, but I see that it's serious and it's launching and it's getting bigger in scale, which is really very reassuring because in Ukraine we were kind of pioneers countering it and witnessing this phenomenon in such a scale. And to some extent we had to create these rules of behavior, rules of countering it from zero, from scratch. And it was incredibly difficult because at that time we were not believed, we were not trusted. It's kind of common right now to say that Russian propaganda is very dangerous, it's really dividing societies, but at that point we had to prove it. It was like lengthy hourly discussions, and it was really difficult.
Yeah, but you say that it's not enough. In your opinion, maybe you have some ideas. How would it be better to counteract Russian propaganda? What do we need more for that?
I think that more decisive action is needed. Not only is needed at going after those media organizations who have Russian influence inside. For example, lately there was a case with Euronews channel, which is actually, it's not the first time at which this channel is caught in kind of very strange coverage.
Could you remind our audience?
There was a piece from Crimea where you can see Russian soldiers teaching kids how to make demining. And there was not even one mention in the piece that the Crimean Peninsula was annexed, yes, and occupied by Russia currently. So it is very strange. It's not common, and it's obviously some influences there. So yeah, but still, it's a very good sign that we have these think tanks which are going after Kremlin propaganda, which are exposing, and I see in Twitter they are quite popular. Like my colleagues, journalists, are following them, are retweeting them, are really, and it's helpful because there are professional people who look into it and really monitor what's going on. It's very, very useful, yes.
Well, from what I remember, last year the European Union was to escalate its efforts to counter Russia's hybrid warfare by providing an extra funds for the EU's External Action Service. Are you aware how is it functioning on this matter, this External Action Service?
It's difficult for me to say because for me what reaches me, actually it's really these think tanks which are following some things which are like, I would say, analogs of what we have in Ukraine, which is called Stop Fake. It's like a deliberate, targeted organization which is just following just fakes. It's not a media outlet. It's just following the disinformation. And this is very important to have, and it's kind of like a filter.
I'm sure that you monitor European media a lot. Do the usual media support this, and do they react on disinformation somehow as well?
Yes, sure. For example, in ARD, we have also last year we launched a special service which is a fact-checking department, which is whose aim is actually to filter the disinformation. It already made few good stories. For example, there was a story recently about some Georgian snipers on Maidan, this usual very favorable topic of manipulation of Russian propaganda is snipers on Maidan, which were shooting from Hotel Ukraina, which were like from opposition side, which were like shooting both sides, and so on and so on and so on. And there was a very strange investigation in an Italian newspaper, which was proving that there were some kind of Georgian snipers brought into Maidan who, shot
got
people
involved in all this
and so on.
madness.
RT made quite a good, and I was really very pleased that my media organization is also now having a special department which is working on fact checking, and they really debunked this story. They went through it. They showed where it's inconsistent, where it's not true, where it's weak, and so on and so on. It's very good.
That's
and I think
excellent.
not only IRD is a very big organization. Sometimes it's difficult for IRD to make swift decisions or pivot, quickly. But the fact that even such a big monster organization is able to be flexible and react to these threats is very good. Yeah.
Well, if this propaganda and, as an example, RT is so functional, for sure it is worth of a lot of resources. How much money do Russians pay for their state media outlet?
Well, I don't remember the exact figure, but it's a massive figure. Of course, it's nothing in comparison to what we spend in Ukraine and what European countries spend. It's nothing in comparison. And we have to be aware that it's not only about Russia Today. Russia Today is a very obvious example. It's something only over the surface. It's something that we notice. There is a lot of influence and a lot of money going into under the surface influence, into think tanks, where you have influence, into media outlets where you have Russians in the key positions and who influence the media policy. You have lots of efforts. Well, still, some Russian propaganda spins are still existent in media. For example, if you read the English language media, you always find the rebels. Russian-backed rebels in Donbass. It's just it's not even obscure language. It's just not true. It's just like not meeting. It doesn't represent the reality. And this is shameful that this term was not only adopted in the beginning and helped Russia obscure its war against Ukraine, but it's kept on in the fourth year of this war when so much evidence and so much truth is out, and we already obviously know that this is a Russian war against Ukraine. It's not kind of some mythical rebels or insurgents in the east of Ukraine, but still this language is recreated. It keeps on and on and on and on. So this influence is much broader than only RT.
Well, you remembered a few instances of Russian propaganda, and according to The Guardian, before 2017 German elections, Angela Merkel had been the biggest target for Russian disinformation covering Europe. How did this target shift afterwards, in your opinion?
Well, they did not really target. If you look at the German elections, on contrary to French elections and the US elections, there was less open, toxic propaganda that was out there. This has few explanations. First of all, I think Russia has enough influence even without propaganda. It rather fueled AfD, it fueled the ultra-right party. They really fueled them. The Russian trolls were helping this party, especially before the elections, so this was the focus. They were not going after Merkel personally, but what they really did in 2015 and 2016 was they were fueling anti-refugee sentiment in Germany. And this was really scary because they invented this story about Lisa girl, who was a teenage girl who was raped by a refugee, an event which never happened, but they reported on it. And when they were caught that they invented the story, they still refused to back down, and they just continued lying. It changed a lot of minds in Germany. I remember that time. My colleagues, my friends in Germany who followed this story, they were really angry. They were outraged by this amount of lie, and that even when caught, they don't back down. And it changed a lot German public opinion about Russian propaganda, yes.
Well, Russia has been accused not only of meddling in German elections, but also in the United States, as you mentioned, in the Netherlands, France, and the Czech Republic, and several other countries. Do you have an idea how to prevent future interference?
Well, I think societies, to some extent, may develop a kind of immunity to Russian propaganda. We see it in Ukraine partly. Ukraine is still heavily influenced by Russian propaganda,
Sure.
but not as heavily influenced in 2014. It's my impression. I think that people have this immunity because when it's really when the poison is coming to the organism for such a long time, at some point it just stops. If organism survives,
Yeah.
it stops working. So. To some extent, this propaganda will just be less effective with time, first of all. And I think the paradox here, is that when I think about it, I don't think that that the Kremlin was planning such a long propaganda campaign. I think basically what happened is that during Maidan and during the beginning of aggression in Ukraine, propaganda was used as a bargaining chip. So I think Russians just kind of proposed to the world, okay, we'll stop spreading this propaganda and stop saying kind of bad things about you if you meet our demands. It was like like a bargaining chip. So they proposed it as a bargain.
To us or to whom?
To us, to the West, to the EU, to the US, but
So
they did not meet
that's
any.
how they want to influence
Yes,
the world.
but propaganda itself was a type of like a bargaining chip. We will stop this if you meet our demands. The demands were not met, and they just had to continue and continue and continue. And this propaganda became toxic, more and more and more toxic.
Well,
so I think to some extent they didn't expect themselves to arrive into this situation which they are now, and because they cannot back down. And going further is also scary. So,
well, on the other hand, it looks like Russians do always like to be in control of the things, and they always like to influence something in the world. So basically, it means that this propaganda would never actually stop because these requirements or their demands would never eventually fall shorter.
Yes, sure. But the thing is, it's not even. I just think they don't want even to control. What they want is they want to other countries to fail. This is a big difference because it's about equating others to yourself. So we are in trouble, but look at yourselves. And this is the whole point. This is a classic spoiler state which tries to equal everyone else to themselves by making them fail.
Well, and another issue that I would like to talk about also, we have the 2018 winter session of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe ongoing, and lately there have been enough odd statements proposing to lift the sanctions on Russia. At the same time, in its latest resolution, PACE just recognized that Russia leads the war against Ukraine. What does this controversy mean for Ukraine, and why is it so controversial?
Yeah, I think that despite all the talk that Russia may get back to PACE, which is a long talk, as you know, like it's going on for years, this hasn't happened. And
well, they want it to happen until the next year.
Well, yes, but still, it doesn't happen yet. So
yes.
The things which didn't happen still they didn't happen yet. And on the other hand, it's quite shameful what Mr. Jagland was saying, what other pro-Russian politicians are saying.
Just to remind our audience, he is Secretary General of the Council of Europe.
Yes, and it's shameful because it's not, again, not on moral grounds. It's not about moral grounds even. It's about practical things. So appeasing aggressors leads to more trouble. It leads to more war, more trouble, and it never leads to any solution. This was proven in Europe 70 years ago, and there is no difference right now with that situation. So if some European politicians do not understand that they can act like this now, but in history they will go down in history as appeasers, and they will have a shameful place in history. That's their choice. I mean, we have such choices. We have a Chamberlain, we have a Lord Halifax in Britain who wanted to negotiate with Hitler till the very last moment when he already invaded all the Europe. They still wanted to negotiate with him because they were afraid, because whatever. But they took their place in history in the end. It's a shameful place, and if some European politicians want to take same place, well, what can we do? But it's not the right strategy, not the right way.
That's true. That's true. And the very last question, because we're running out of time, unfortunately, the fact is that the newly elected head of the Parliamentary Session Assembly of the Council of Europe, Mikhail Nikolotti, insists on continuing the dialogue with the Russian Parliament, and he seems to have a pretty pro-Russian position. At the same time, Vice President of the PACE was selected Ukrainian was selected for that position. How do you think could this influence some undergoing these streams in PACE?
But by my inner feeling, I think Nikolotti is on the right side of the history. If we look at his history of his vote in PACE, he was always voting for the resolutions Ukraine proposed. And I don't think he's a second argument. But there is still a very strong lobby and very strong influence of Russia inside PACE, so it will not be easy. I still think that Russia will not be returned to PACE. But it will not be easy, and of course, Ukrainian.
That's going to be a struggle.
It's going to be a struggle, yes. But Ukraine has quite a strong delegation, as we see now, and I think that Ukraine will be able to counter these attempts to appease the aggressor.
And we wish them success.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this interesting conversation. That was Gosha Tykhyi, freelance producer currently working with the German TV channel ARD. Thank you so much for watching Head to Head. I'm Oles Gerjuk. Goodbye.